Bring a Trailer podcast.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Bring a Trailer podcast. This is Alex, and I'm joined by Zach. How are you doing today, Zach?
Hey, I'm good. What's on the schedule today?
Well, I was hoping that we could chat a little bit about cars that have been on the site recently, interesting results, things that we were getting excited about, and then maybe we could pivot over to the long list of wonderful questions that our staff sent us, topics that they were interested in hearing us discuss on the podcast.
Awesome. I'm stoked for the staff questions.
Okay, killer. I am too. We can give some shout outs to our colleagues who were very generous in suggesting topics. But before we do that, let's talk about what's been on the site recently. There's been some stuff that has gotten me pretty excited. We were talking before we started recording here about some of the Rod Emory cars that have been on recently. We've had a couple of them. Always exciting when we get one of those cars. Typically, they're 356s. And we had one of those, a Speedster with no bumpers. Tell us how you feel about no bumpers on Speedsters, Zach.
Man. Does anyone feel great about no bumpers on Speedsters?
I don't know.
I could do sleigh bumpers, but no bumpers, not my favorite.
What is a sleigh? You mean like the little Nerf bar things?
Do you remember Randy's black Super 90 for this?
No, I only knew about his silver 356A.
They're kind of Nerf bar-y. Yeah, they jut down and then curl up in the front.
Yeah, I've seen
also
those
have those
before.
over.
Yeah, I think maybe that's what I always referred to as Nerf bars. But yeah, just two little vertical things. No
They're not.
cross member.
Yeah, they're not horizontal.
Yeah, okay. This is an interesting car. It has kind of a 550 looking front end on it. Great color. One of the things we were talking about is how shockingly powerful the motors have become in these.
Well, that's what I wanted to ask. So walk me through, what was the engine in this car that just sold?
So this one it's a 4-cylinder and it's 2.6 liter and it's got allegedly 260 horsepower. So we had here in the office for a while a older Emory build that the co-founders of Bring a Trailer had. It was a much more traditional looking 356, though beautifully built, as all the Rod Emory cars are. And it had a Polo motor in it, which, as I recall, was like a 3.6 liter,
Like a 964 based.
right,
engine,
with
right?
2 cylinders chopped off,
Yeah.
right, which makes it 2.4 liter, but still overhead cam and all that. But I thought that was like 180 horsepower. So I don't know how they've gone, almost 100 horsepower more out of these little 4 cylinders. This thing must fly.
I mean, pretty crazy. Yeah. ITBs, it must sound ridiculous.
Oh, can you imagine?
And yeah, I like the rear 3/4 a lot, Carrera style grille. My big question is, how long till guys with Beck Speedsters and vintage classic Speedsters start putting K-series motors in them and also making 260 horsepower and saying, oh, it's basically an Emory Speedster.
I never want to record a podcast with you, Zach, where we don't talk about a K-series
K-swap.
K-swap in a 356. Probably only a matter of time. I used to think the Subaru motors were sacrilegious, but I'm more and more pro, except I don't know where you fit the radiator.
Fair. Yeah. I'm not the biggest replica person on staff.
I have tendency not to be as well. Although we had a great result on an alloy bodied Cobra replica, didn't we recently? That's about as good as you can get for a replica, right? An alloy body on a Cobra. I mean, you've almost got the real thing there.
Yeah, I know. The car it's built on is relatively simple, so you can get a pretty true recreation. So yeah, I can get down with those, and you get a lot of the experience of what it would be like to roll one around in the 60s.
Yeah.
It's cool when they're on events. But yeah, one thing that's also interesting to me about the Speedster is the last few Speedster results that have really rung the bell like this. This car sold for $802,000, which is a lot relative to a stock Speedster, right? It's like double. The last few to really ring the bell like that have been modified cars. Serio's black Speedster, which was sweet with the Wilhoit motor.
Oh, that car was great. That was the car that had the black Rudge knockoffs on it.
Yes.
Yeah, that car
and the
was fun.
Wilhoit motor is sweet in that.
Yes.
And it was 4-speed. I mean, great event car. And I believe he's driven it a ton on a ton of different events. That sold for, I think, around $600,000.
Wow.
So it's interesting to see original cars are maybe a little flat over the past couple years. I mean, it's still an incredible car. A lot of event eligibility and owning one like gives you access to all this just cool Porsche World stuff and cool vintage event stuff. So I see the appeal, but interesting to see people really paying up for modified cars like that.
Do you think that is brand or mark specific? I mean, Porsches are kind of famous for having modifications, right? Like most Porsches are modified, at least most vintage Porsches. So do you think that would hold true for other cars too? Or do you think that's kind of specific to Porsche where people are willing to tolerate more modifications?
Good question. I don't know. It seems like I guess you could call them manufacturers or like tuning houses that are building these either true to the original ethos recreations or resto mods like the Gunther Works 993s that have crazy performance but still some vintage characteristics. Seems like Porsche is the big one that sort of cracked that market. We haven't seen much from other manufacturers other than There's the Jaguar Eagle,
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
um,
Uh-huh.
sort of Restomati E-Type.
In the truck world, there's some of that, right? Jonathan Ward was on this podcast with Randy recently, and obviously those cars have enormous value, the Icon builds.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point. I don't know. It'd be cool. I mean, the Alphaholics GTVs are sweet. Everyone here in the office would love to have one, but they just don't have quite the. Just seems like there's fewer of them out there than all the Porsche
Yeah,
ones.
totally. I think we've only had one of those crazy Alphaholics build. I loved that car though, with ITBs on it and carbon fiber body panels and stuff. That was an
Yeah,
interesting car because I don't know if you remember that one, but it was bought on BAT in unmodified state, and then the guy sent it off to Alphaholics to have the build done, and then listed it again. Did you
I do
cover stuff
remember
on it?
that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think he bought it from Nusha. I
Yeah,
think it was a
Noosh.
yeah. So he was starting with a pretty clean car.
Yeah. Very cool.
Anyway, yeah, interesting tangent. What maybe we'll circle back to that on a future podcast.
It could be a whole topic, right?
I am curious, yeah, what manufacturer you'd like to see or what model you'd like to see
Yeah, I
sort of
mean,
reissued like.
typically the older I get, the more I want the car to be the way it was when it was new from the manufacturer. And yet
Yep.
you can't deny an Emory car or an Icon Bronco, right? Like that's an amazing experience in and of itself. But I think you're right. That's almost like its own manufacturer building it, right? It's like an Alpina is different than a
Yeah.
BMW in some ways,
It's
right?
also funny to hear you say that because your 912's kind of like built the way you like it. You've got a fat motor,
Totally.
slammed.
Yeah. That took 20 years to dial it in though, and
And
like
now do you wish now that you're an old man, do you wish it was
no.
just stock?
No, a
There you go.
912E is a sad object in stock form.
Mm.
I remember what that car was like with 90 horsepower. It is better now. But anyway, I
But
am
yeah,
thinking about putting 15-inch wheels on it and skinnier tires and everything, make it
cool.
a
I
little
support that.
softer. Yeah.
I love driving that car. It's so neutral, handles it's very confidence inspiring. But and fat motors is what used to be in the Emery cars in the early days, right?
That's correct. That's in fact, that's why I wanted that motor for that car.
Really?
On Jay Leno's garage many years ago, Rod Emery brought two cars, one of which was later auctioned on BAT, that silver 356, I think it was an A coupe.
Hmm.
He brought two cars to Jay Leno. This was like pretty early on when Jay Leno's garage was becoming kind of a YouTube phenomenon. And those cars had 2.7-liter fat motors in them, which are still push rod. They're push rod Type 4 Volkswagen engines with like 180 horsepower. And that's what made me want to build one. And when I told the fat guys that I wanted a 2.7, they said, no, 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 that's for the rich guys. You want a 2.4. It'll be more reliable and you'll make almost as
Nice.
much
They
power.
sized you up
They totally
immediately.
did. They totally did. And they were right. The motor's been great. I've had it for right when I first started working with you when I
I
had that built.
remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've had it for 6 or 7 years.
That drive we took for the first time after it was built, it was smoking up a storm.
God, I don't remember that. Where was
And
that, on a
Howard was in his
rally?
mom's Cayman.
Oh, I do remember that drive. Oh man. Yeah. I almost killed
We
myself on
yeah,
that
we can
drive.
recount those tales in the future.
Yeah. Trying to keep up with Howard's Cayman in that 912. Interesting comparison talking about values and modified cars. The other Emery car we had was a not a 356. It was a short wheelbase 911S, a 67. I freaking loved that car. Still did great. What did it sell for? 300 something like
310.
310. Great car. Not something you see every day. A 911 by Rod Emery.
I know, I was just gonna ask. I think that's we had a 912 Emery race car 4 years ago now, and I think that was a pretty early car for him. Yeah, interesting to see a 911 come through on them.
Pretty great car. Tremendous horsepower out of a 2.8 liter twin plug motor. Great stance, great
Setup.
colors. Would you cruise that around, or is that too racy for the street, do you think?
I've yet to come across something that I think is too I have a high tolerance for stuff like that, but for me, I'm just a little bit more of a long wheelbase early 911 person.
Yeah,
Short wheelbase cars are cool for a lot of reasons, but the wheels are always so inboard, which you like,
I do.
and I understand the appeal, but I like some of the touches that the little bit later long wheelbase
Yeah.
cars get.
I mean, my dream would be to have my love for, you used to have a 72. I love a 72 with the outside fuel door and all that. Those are my favorites. But I like all these long hood cars, Zach. Anything in particular that you wanted to talk about, or any interesting results that you thought were kind of exciting?
Well, you're bugging me about this 400,000 mile Supra, which was cool to see. I mean, kind of a labor of love, a little bit out of the guy selling it, assisting the nice older woman whose husband, I think, daily drove it for basically his entire life from the 90s on. That's how it accumulated all those miles, and it was in rough shape. Did you go down the YouTube videos he made?
I didn't go. I watched a few of them here and there. The main thing I was doing was reading through the comments. This car got attracted a lot of attention. I think a few news outlets even picked it up. It got almost 200 comments and over 50,000 views, and ended up bidding pretty strong. Were you surprised by that result? Sold for almost $50,000.
Yeah, it sold for 58,750. I thought it would probably get to 50 all day. The super parts are just getting so expensive, where I'm pretty sure at that Getrag 6 speed is like bottomed at 10 grand. So parts alone,
No kidding. That's what those gearboxes cost?
yeah,
Whoa, because people wanna swap them into the automatic cars?
that and they just are super robust, hold a lot of power. I believe it's the same transmission that's in the R34 also. I don't know what else is shared with it. Anyway,
God,
I
I hope
mean,
somebody doesn't part that out. I hope somebody
no,
just
no,
cleans it
no.
up and drives it around. I love
I
all
mean, the
those mice.
seller did an awesome job of cleaning it up himself. And sorry, it sold for 49.5. There was another
There were
97
2
blue,
blues, right? Yeah.
also high mileage that sold the week after. Or
What was the mileage on that one? I saw
or I
that one
guess
too.
it's low mileage relative to this one. It was 205,000 miles.
Amazing.
But the seller on the 388,000 mile car did a phenomenal job with all the YouTube videos. If you're into, do you ever go deep on detailing cleaning videos?
I like on Reddit, there's the oddly satisfying. There's oh no, there's like a power washing porn subreddit that I watch, and there's also like a, oddly satisfying one. And a lot of times they are about cleaning. I do love watching that kind of stuff.
There's some great cleaning vids from this guy pulling it out and redoing all the carpets and interior. So he really put the sweat equity into it. And the result, yeah, it looks like a car that's ready to go another 400,000 miles.
Awesome. A couple years ago, you were contemplating a kind of driver level, semi in need of restoration Mark IV Supra turbo, weren't you?
I'm always kind of thinking about these. I think like a as stock as possible, like this car, and kind of rough, so you could still drive it around the city. You know how much I love road trips. Like cruise it to LA. It would be
Totally.
great on the freeway, solid. I'm not into the whole like big power. I don't need a crazy modified super or anything like that. But just to enjoy it kind of as it was built in the time, much like you were saying that you like a little bit earlier though.
I'm sure they're not slow. They're over 320 horsepower
320,
or something
yeah,
like that. I'm
300
sure it's
pound-feet of
not
torque, six
terribly
speed.
slow.
There's a great best motoring video of, I think it's 93, the release of the
Sorry, best
Supra.
motoring is the one where all the Japanese race drivers race like street cars against each other. Yeah, okay.
Exactly.
I've
Yeah,
seen
it's
clips of
it's
that.
like Gran Turismo in real life. And for the Supra launch, they went to San Francisco and they drive, it's a black hardtop 6 speed 93, and he's lapping it completely stock around Laguna Seca. And
Whoa.
there's all these old shots of San Francisco of them filming in traffic and some city shots, him driving the Super around. It's just awesome to see 30 years ago. And then, yeah, they go to Laguna Seca and there's huge amounts of body roll for what we're used to now. But he still clicks off. He's got to at least do a 1 minute 50 on
Wow.
90s tires and a
Amazing.
stock car. So, yeah, they're plenty quick.
I'm nostalgic for body roll, Zach. That's one thing we forgot to mention about this car. This is a hard top. The high mileage Supra is not a target top,
Oh, yeah.
which is pretty rare, right?
It's uncommon. Yeah, there's some years where you can only get a Targa. When you can only get an automatic too. I'm a Targa guy
I
these
know,
though.
I know, I know.
They're
This
they're
is
kind of heavy. It's kind of a big GT car, and it's just nice to
totally.
the top fits in the rear hatch. It's
And
thoughtfully
correct me
engineered.
if I'm wrong, but I believe it actually like screws. It's like a hard mount for the target top.
Yeah,
It's
there's a little tool.
right.
So super buyers out there, make sure you have the little Targa top pouch and tool in the glove box.
Tips from the BAT podcast. There was also, speaking of Japanese cars and Zach love, there was a white R34 Skyline that did really well. I presume you were following that one. You love those cars.
Yeah, unfortunately, every time I'm on here, I say Skyline. If you're playing the BAT podcast drinking game, probably drunk by now.
I was hoping you could school me on Skylines a little bit though, because this has many numbers and letters after Skyline, and I am ashamed to admit I'm always a little confused on all the different variations. So this is a V Spec N1. What the hell does that mean, Zach?
Nice. Yeah, the hierarchy of R34s. We'll see if I get any emails in my inbox telling me how
We're going to
little I know
ignore
after
them.
this. Yeah, so starting in 1999, you could get a R34 Skyline GTR. In
Okay.
98, there's at least a GT narrow body, doesn't have an RB26, naturally aspirated GTT would have a turbo, they're rear-wheel drive. Different car for the purpose of this conversation. Yeah, 99 is the first year of an R34 Skyline, and you could get just a GTR or you could get a GTR V spec. The big difference between the two is the non V spec has a fully mechanical diff, and the V spec gets this E diff, which is first for the Skyline. The 33 and the 32 had a mechanical diff. This
Is
gets
it
the
one
V
of the
diff.
first E diffs, period?
It must be, yeah, that it communicates what the front and rear tires are doing to the computer like 10 times as much info as the mechanical diff does. So that's the V spec. Gets a couple other minor things, but the big change there. And then in 2000 from the factory, Nissan made, I believe it's 38 N1s. And it was a race homologation. They made an
Oh,
N1 in the 32 and in the 33, and it was so Nissan could take these cars racing. So
is
they
that
have,
Japanese supercar? What's that series called where those
is
cars
it Super
race?
GT?
Super GT. Okay.
Yeah, I don't know too much about the
Okay.
racing history on these. Anyway, the N1, there's no central locks, there's no AC, there's no stereo. They get thinner paint from the factory. They
Whoa.
all came in white. I think they call it factory hardened paint. It's this
Whoa.
lighter paint on it. Yeah, no privacy glass.
So this is top desirability level for 2000.
In terms of, yeah, production numbers alone, it's very true to the race car in terms of the features that it strips out. It's a little more hardcore than I typically like, just because, yeah, I like cruise my cars on road trip and
You
stuff
said
like that.
no AC on that car?
No AC, no stereo, but it still gets the awesome computer that debuted on the R34 Skyline that has
The
the,
PlayStation looking thing?
yeah,
Yeah, I
Gran
remember that.
Turismo
Yeah.
graphics on there and
Uh-huh.
gives you like pitch and yaw and boost and all this stuff. And they also get a unique engine that has forged pistons. I think a different oil cooler, different cams. It may actually be the same cams, but forged pistons and I think connecting rods and some other stuff. And I believe they get different, slightly larger and ceramic turbos that are just more robust. So a lot of the 38 cars that came out over the past 20 years, they were cheap for a little bit, and people, as people with these cars do, modified them quite a bit. So seeing one like this that's relatively or pretty much stock is definitely the formula for what was a great result for it. So yeah, and then in late '01, early '02, they debut a refresh of the car. You can get a V-Spec 2, which gets a carbon fiber hood, different suspension, larger rear brakes, and then they made an N1 of the V-Spec 2, and I think there's only 20 of those. I haven't
Wow.
seen one come to market. And then you get the NERS. There's an M spec NER, and there's also a V spec NER. The M specs on the shore display list. The V isn't. Both of the NERs get the N1 engine. That's the big appeal of them. They get the upgraded engine from what's the street race car homologation, some other little bit unique touches about them. The M spec is like a luxury spec that the chief engineer or the president or some higher up at Nissan at the time loved the R34 Skyline and wanted one that was just more comfortable and luxurious.
I love that.
So they put adaptive suspension on it. I think they call it it's like ripple ride suspension or something like that. So it's more compliant, and then it gets leather interior and factory heated seats. So
Wow.
that's the M spec, and then the V spec is
That
still
sounds
this.
like the Zach spec. That would be a
It's
good.
kinda cool, but it's like it's dumb, but the letter V is so much cooler than
I
the
it
letter
is.
M,
That's true.
right? It's
That's true.
just,
But heated leather seats is kind of strong in a Skyline.
I know, but they're still Nissan leather seats,
Yeah,
and you
right.
can just tell by the photos, like, the fit is not quite right. So yeah, the cloth interior is just way better on
Yeah,
those. Those
sure.
seats are unique to that car and just look so sweet. So,
It's amazing you're able to rattle all that off. I was nodding my head, but I'm lost. Like
I'm
I
sure
already.
there's some corrections that'll be submitted in there, something. Alright, now I
Well,
can finally stop talking about Skylines on this
no,
podcast.
no. Well, it was my fault. I brought it up, and I probably will bring it up again. That was an education. I appreciate that. I like those cars a lot. I do have a hard time keeping straight what's what, but I kind of want the soft comfort car. Was that? Could you option that, or is that a thing that they released it a limited number of the
Yeah,
M
limited
spec?
number. There's
Okay,
285, I think, is M specs, and then there's right around 700 V spec NERs. So that's the split. Yeah, there's just around 1,000, and there's like an ambiguous three that may or may not have been like lost at sea or had an accident. There's something weird with the production numbers on those.
the history of any car is like that, right? People always claim they know exactly what happened, but that's not always the case. Awesome. Any other results that you want to talk about? I have some other things written down here, but I want to make sure we have time to get to our questions from our staffers. I'll just note we had a Vincent Black Shadow. You know how much I love when we list Vincent's, and I always like to bring up motorcycle results that sold for
Bike
86
talk, man,
grand.
like an ex addict. I'm ready to talk.
Well, first of all, we have a great motorcycle team here who specializes in working with our motorcycle sellers and writing those listings up, especially when it's a special bike. Shout out to Tyler Greenblatt, who you know, who's such a great guy and does such a good job with those. But I'm always excited to see those bikes. My dad had a box of Vincent parts in our garage for my whole youth. So it's nice to see them when they're put together and actually rideable. We've had some cool Ferrari Dinos.
Not live, but I had a moment this week where I was just going down such a deep rabbit hole on NC30 Hondas.
Oh man, is that the V4?
Yeah, the VFR 750 is a
Yeah.
four-cylinder, and then
Yes.
they also made an NC, which is a 400cc four-cyl,
Amazing.
revs to 16 grand. They're much less expensive.
That's
Yeah,
the one
wanted
with
to
the
stuff here.
monoshock, like swing arm on one side and white wheels and all that
Yes,
stuff.
it has a single-sided swing
Yeah, dude,
arm,
they look
white
so
wheels,
great. They're like
red, blue.
late 80s. They have the two headlights. Man, those are
Yep.
great looking. Ugh.
I kind of want to just shove one in the office, but it's such a gateway drug to
It's
ripping around
totally
on
is
it.
a gateway drug. That's like the ultimate like rich guy man cave art, one of those things. They are
Yeah,
beautiful looking
that and
motorcycle.
and a 998 Ducati.
Yeah, totally.
All
Well,
right,
I'm
we'll
not
see.
opposed to it. If you want to do that, I'm fine with it. You want to dive into some questions, Zach?
Yeah, please queue them up.
Yes. So this is the other day I said we're going to record a podcast and asked our staff what kind of stuff they'd like us to talk about, and we got a bunch of responses. Tremendous number of responses on airplanes in the background of shots, which maybe we'll save for another day, since I know you're not quite as much of an airplane nerd as I am.
I've
But
become an aviation enthusiast, like as a byproduct of my dislike of flying, though.
Zach and I recently flew back from New York together, and you were clocking all the noises. That's the gear. There's the flaps. There's the spoilers. I was like, you are right, Zach. You were right on.
It's all fun and games till a noise happens that you don't
Until
recognize,
the
and
the bolts on the door plug are loose or missing or whatever it was.
I'm a drive around with the windows down kind of guy anyway.
Heated seats in your R34 Skyline. Got a bunch of good questions here, and a lot of them have to do with things that we hear a lot as staffers. I'll tee these up and we can kind of discuss them back and forth.
Yeah, shout them out. I want to hear who the staffer is too.
Absolutely. So, right up top, we have Ryan S. He threw a lot in here. One of the things he asked about is photo age. And I know that we have discussed this on the podcast before, but it's never a bad idea to talk about photos and how important they are for the presentation of a car. And the specific question that he's asking about is kind of recency of photos and whether that matters. And maybe it's the winter. And so if you took brand new photos, the car would be out in the snow. So maybe is it better to use 5-month-old photos when the car was still in the sun, or when the seller had a pro photographer come out and take the photos? How do you think about that,
I
Zach?
mean, recency is your domain. That's your team setting the tone there.
For sure. I mean, we always put ourselves in the shoes of a buyer, right? Like if you were looking at a car on Bring a Trailer Online, wouldn't you want the pictures to be from yesterday if you could, right? I mean, that's not realistic, but you want them to be as recent as possible to reflect the current condition of the car.
Yeah, and we do have a way on staff to check that also. Even if you say, hey, photos are 9 months old, send us that odometer pic. Let's compare and contrast. And yeah, if the car's traveled, I don't know, 10 miles between now and 9 months ago, probably okay.
It's a tricky one because sometimes folks have great photos of their car, and that matters too, right? A killer presentation, a super amazing hero shot for your lead image is really important to get people to click on your listing and to help get people excited about the idea of owning it. But at the same time, if somebody knew that that photo was from 2 years ago and you'd driven the car 10,000 miles since, then maybe it doesn't matter how great that photo is, right?
100%.
Yep.
If you have different wheels on your car from the time that you uploaded the original photos and are now asking if you can use them, there's your answer.
Totally. Related to that, our guy Roland asks about when folks come, and this is a little bit more in your domain, Zach, with the curation team, when folks come back through with a car that they've bought on the site. So I won this car on the site. Now I'm coming back to Bring a Trailer to sell that car. And they often want to use the photos from the listing from which they bought the car. So how do we talk to those folks?
Yeah, it makes sense. I mean, the photos inspired them to buy the car. They know they're inspiring, want to use them, often are pretty good. It depends a little bit. The biggest favor you can do to yourself is make that listing appear kind of fresh to market. So get new pro photos, sell the dream again. It'll be a little more interesting. You'll probably get a little more banter in the comments in a good way. But if that's not an option, then yeah, take a few to convey its current condition just for buyer confidence and just for freshness. And then we can supplement some of the old ones in there if the car hasn't changed its form or traveled a significant
Yeah.
distance since.
One of the ways folks on my team think about this, the folks who are actually writing the listings and putting them together, is it's all about the confidence of the potential buyer, right? So recent photos, photos that show flaws, photos that show anything that a potential buyer would want to know about. That's the key, right? Like you're trying to get somebody who's looking at a car on the internet to have faith in you as a seller and have faith that the car is as represented. So that's the most important thing in all of these photo discussions.
Exactly. And that's where a quick iPhone walk around vid can do a ton. Even if you
Totally.
can't get that many photos out, depending on the winter in Michigan, you can still get a walk around video and convey to everyone the condition is the same. And then, yeah, maybe use some of those old inspirational photos that you had.
Videos have become so important, and we now have them as part of our photo service that you can opt into. Man, when we first started here, Zach, it was rare to get a video. And so now, as a buyer myself, I would want to see the car start up. I would want somebody to walk around it, right? I would want to see all those things. Expectations have changed on that.
Yeah, hearing it is another thing that inspires me to own.
You down to talk reserves a little bit and talk about the job that you do all day long, you and your crew?
Sure, yeah. Who on staff is submitting a car
So
via
this
the
is from
Slack channel?
our guy Rusty. So you can send him your hate mail, Rusty.
XJ Cherokee, no reserves. Let's go, Rusty.
So
Is
one
the
of the
Dolomite finally getting cleaned up?
I'm looking at his Slack profile photo, and it's the Dolomite.
Nice.
So Rusty taking on the persona of a potential seller on BAT, saying, "Hey, it's my car. I'm going to pay you $99 to list it. Why can't I select any reserve I want?" I presume you hear that question all day long, right,
Yeah,
Zach?
that's a tough one. That's one that used to bring out a lot of emotions in Howard and I in the early days. But now, yeah, letting people know it's just not a fee to list service straight up. It's a curated marketplace. And like any curated marketplace, the reserve's a component of that. We want to vet to make sure sellers are realistic and not just testing the market. It's sort of important to the integrity of our marketplace. Everyone knows they have a realistic chance of winning the car, and things have been vetted to make sure sellers' expectations are within market value.
Yeah, nobody feels good when the car doesn't meet reserve at the
Oh
end.
yeah, and it feels terrible for us to like list a yellow Civic Si with 40,000 miles with $100,000 reserve.
Yeah, yeah. That one will be no reserve if my son doesn't drive it, Zach. He actually really wants it. He's only less than 2 years away from his permit, if you can believe that. Also from Rusty, another really good question that we get a lot, which is how many people are going to see my car? Where is it going to be featured? Like, how does it get highlighted? Like, how do we make sure people click on my listing? We have a really healthy viewer count, watcher count on our listings, but presumably you get that question in curation a lot too, Zach.
Yeah, it's weird. We used to get it a lot more in the early days when I think more people were unfamiliar or skeptical with the site. But now we're so fortunate to have just so much notoriety that people kind of know what to expect on that front. I get a lot more direct requests for like, can this be on your Instagram, or can I Venmo you to get this on your Instagram? Unfortunately, no direct requests there, but many cars are still featured on our Facebook. I know that's not as big of an audience as it once was. A lot of people have kind of shifted over to Instagram, but that still goes a lot. Everything goes on our what's now X, I believe. Assuming we switched
Yeah,
over
be careful.
there.
Elon
That's
gets mad if you call it Twitter, so be
um,
careful.
yeah. So we're doing that for a while, and then the best presented and sort of the most unique listings have the highest likelihood of making it onto our Instagram. So that's what I tell people all day when they have, yeah, maybe a nice C1 Corvette with a good story behind it. That the best thing you can do is photograph it well. It's going
Yep.
to increase your odds of getting featured and on our social channels, and also just drive higher bidding. So all comes back to the photos. In terms of engagement and views, we're probably around 8 to 10,000 on average for most listings, and watcher counts probably around 700 or so. But like that Emory car, that was probably a 50,000 view listing.
Yeah,
Supra
the
is at
Supra was definitely,
52,
yeah,
yeah, with 1250 watchers.
pretty
Some of that is
awesome.
model specific.
Or people get excited about the car. They get excited about the story, to your point. That's a good segue into a question from our guy, Dave. Dave D, again, kind of taking the persona of a seller who has just received their listing from our team. Why is my description so negative? Why are you only talking about the problems with my car? And what Dave, I think, wants us to speak to is kind of our philosophy on the importance of disclosing, issues with cars and being honest about what they are and what they aren't, which is something that we didn't pioneer at BAT, but we've always believed in and lent into. How do you think about that, Zach?
Oh man, that's totally your domain. I can't take that question from you.
Well, you can start, and then I can mop up the floor afterwards.
It,
I could
it is
speak at
funny,
length
like,
about this,
yeah, well,
obviously.
we haven't necessarily pioneered it. I do think our very like objective voice has been kind of pioneered in the industry. Like, there's not these flowery, long-winded descriptions. And it is funny now, sometimes when I go on to Craigslist or I'm browsing online, a lot of people have emulated that
I see
style.
that
You see
too.
that?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm like, oh man, this guy's read some Bring a Trailer
it makes me
listings.
blush a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. I mean, for me at least, I think it goes back to what we were talking about with photos, which is again, you're listing a car that you want thousands of dollars, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars for sight unseen on the internet. So it's all about getting the confidence of potential buyers, potential bidders, even just the community members and experts who are going to talk about that car, right? And so I always tell the folks who work for me, put yourself in the shoes of one of those potential buyers. What would you want to know if you were going to buy this car, right? You'd want to know what issues it has. You'd want to know the history of it. You'd want a straightforward and as objective a telling of the car about what it is and what it isn't as possible. And that is not traditionally how cars have been sold, right? If you're a salesman, you're often talking about just the virtues and trying to sweep the issues under the rug. And that's no way to get somebody, no way to make somebody feel confident on the internet.
Agree. And yeah, while subjectivity is entertaining, it's also subjectivity and hyperbole is like everything wrong with listings online. All these throwaway turns, heads. It's
Oh,
just like
God.
meaningless.
You know how I get exercised about some of these things. I mean, what is a nut and bolt restoration, Zach? I don't even know what that means, and it's used all the time in this industry, and it frustrates a lot of us to no end.
All right, beers for the next one, and we'll air out our grievances of least favorite
Totally,
selling cliches over the last
totally.
4 decades.
I guess one other thing I'll just say on that is our team really cares about this a lot. Like everyone on staff at Bring a Trailer is really passionate about being super objective and transparent, which sounds like a line that we would feed to people, but it's really true. It really motivates people to do their jobs excellently here and makes it such a great place to work. And I'm so glad we've been able to kind of inculcate that value to all of our colleagues. So
Agree. Well
cool.
said.
Couple more, and then we can sign off here. Dustin F, who I think you met when he was out here a couple weeks ago, he asks about, the kind of people who are Bring a Trailer readers. And you and I have been to lots of events, and I would say it's actually a shockingly broad demographic of people who come up to us in the tent. We actually have a pretty broad spectrum of ages, and wouldn't you say that's true?
Oh, 100%. It's crazy how even the metrics are across 18 to 34, and then it's like 34 to 50. Or it's a really even spread across ages. And I'm blown away at just the literal diversity of our audience in person whenever we do all these events. It's incredible in both cars and people.
Yep, agreed completely. I think it's one of the things that attracted me to Bring a Trailer for all the years that I was a fan before I ever worked here, right? Is the eclecticism of the cars and the people and all of that. So I agree completely. And I would also say that the fact that we are kind of a community based company, right? I mean,
Yeah.
the community is at the core of all of it, and that it's kind of a free place to hang out and talk about something you love really it's a quite welcoming place, I
Oh yeah,
think.
I was just gonna say I love how welcoming our community feels, and it's also just crazy. Our corner of the internet's like pretty civil.
Totally.
I
Totally.
mean, case in point, read any comments on any YouTube video now. It's
Ugh, dude, I can't even do it. It's out of control. I actually, I don't know if you found this. Like, I am such a partisan for what we do. I have a hard time even reading car content in most places. People are so
hmm,
kind of strongly, angrily opinionated in so many corners of the internet, even when it comes to our hobby, that I'm like, no, thank you. Like, I'd rather go somewhere where people want to talk about the things that they love about the car in front of them, right? Than, like one of my favorite car buddies in high school, he would get excited about anybody's car. Could have been a slammed Honda Civic or my crappy
you
old
owe a lot in
912 or
that in you, which I always really appreciate, and
totally.
it
If
makes it
somebody else
so.
is enthusiastic, it's easy to share that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it definitely lifts you up in a good way.
And we
I
get a
could
lot.
use a little more of that.
Let's hang out more, man.
Yeah,
I think that's a good
I could say something nice about speedsters with no bumpers.
totally. You welcome all speedsters, Zach. Well, that's a pretty good spread of what we got asked. I want to save some of these so that we have future topics to talk about. Maybe we can talk airplanes one of these times, and I can talk about all the warbirds and interesting private jets, PJs that
Yeah,
have been in
maybe
the
when we
back.
finally get a P-51 Mustang listing, we can make the airplane
Man,
podcast.
one of our power sellers, I won't say which, he one time teased a F4 Phantom, which I didn't even know. Do you even know what that is?
I
It's like
have
a
no idea.
Vietnam era supersonic fighter. That did not come to pass. Not sure what the F4 Phantom market is like these days, but I love it when we list airplanes. We've listed a few, but it's
Yeah.
been a while since we had one. And typically they're like kind of garage art. Usually they're not super functional. We had an air coupe project. We had some kind of home builds, but I would like to list more, although that's a complicated thing.
Yeah, a few more. A few of the collectible ones would be nice to see.
Okay, Zach, anything else? That's
I
that's
would just
40
say
minutes.
if
That's
you've
a
listened this long, one, shout out to you. And two, if you have questions for us, yeah, hit us up at podcast at. I like the staff assuming like a seller persona, but it'd be cool to lob just general questions at us or topics. And that goes for our entire community and listener base.
well said. Hope you have a great weekend, Zach. It was fun to do this with you.
Yeah,
Can't wait to do it
likewise.
again. And thanks everyone for listening, and we'll talk to you soon.